Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for December 13th, 2023. Let me begin with a quote from a retired Major General of the Israel Defense Forces, Giora Eiland, E-I-L-A-N-D, who's the former head of Israel's National Security Council and continues as an advisor to Netanyahu. And he said this on November 19th. Israel is not fighting a terrorist organization, but against the state of Gaza. He went on to say, Israel must not provide the other side with any capability that prolongs its life. In an op-ed in Yediot Aharonot, which is the leading circulation paper in Israel, he wrote, quote, "Let's not be intimidated by the world," unquote, with its warnings of, quote, humanitarian disaster in Gaza and of severe epidemics. We must not shy away from this. After all, severe epidemics in the south of the Gaza Strip will bring victory closer and reduce casualties among the Israel Defense Forces soldiers, unquote. And this fits in with the whole theme of thinning the population, which Netanyahu has talked about, and also what is more directly called ethnic cleansing, displacing and killing the Palestinian population so that there will be a one-state solution, which is Israel only, Greater Israel, which is what Netanyahu has devoted his entire career to. Now, this was put up for a vote, this basic idea, which has been the driving force behind the extermination supposedly of Hamas, but actually the slaughter of civilians in Gaza. This was challenged by the majority of the world in the United Nations General Assembly with a resolution yesterday, which was passed calling for a ceasefire. It was passed overwhelmingly, 153 voting for the resolution, 10 opposed, and 23 abstaining. Of course, one of the opposed to the resolution was the United States. So it appears that Biden administration talking about a rules-based order defended by the United States has just been exposed as a fraud by the majority of the world's nations. Yet the slaughter is continuing in Gaza. Biden said to Netanyahu that while Israel is losing international support due to, quote, indiscriminate bombing, unquote, the U.S. still supports the goal of Netanyahu's policy, which is to exterminate Hamas. Now, let me just give you a sense of how the world is responding to this by quoting from two statements, one from China and one from Russia, supposedly violators of human rights. And in China, we have the foreign ministry spokesman responding to the new sanctions against China over so-called human rights violations. She said, if the U.S. really cares about human rights, the last thing it should do is to veto the Security Council resolution calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. The only country that has done so, while the humanitarian disaster in Gaza continues to deteriorate by the hour, unquote. That's from China. Then we have Sergei Lavrov from Russia, the foreign minister, who put this in a larger context, very similar to the language we have been hearing from Helga Zepp-LaRouche and from our organization, that this is not simply an Arab-Israeli conflict being refought, but actually reflects a change in 500 years of history. What Lavrov said is that there is a new multipolar world which is emerging after 500 years of domination of what we call the collective West. He continues, in order to suppress this kind of development or any dissent, our Western colleagues decided to sacrifice all the principles of globalization, which they have been selling to everybody for decades and decades, for the sake of the rules-based order, unquote, or what we should say is what Blinken and Biden call the rules-based order. Now, lest you think it's just countries such as China and Russia that are jumping off the bandwagon of the rules-based order. Let me read something from a letter from Christian religious leaders in the town of Bethlehem, which is in the West Bank of Palestine. They sent a letter to Biden, and this is from Catholic, Lutheran, Greek Orthodox, and other religious leaders who sent a powerful emotional appeal calling for a comprehensive and just peace for Palestinians and Israelis. They wrote in language which actually reflects these statements from Yitzhak Rabin from the September 1993 meeting with Arafat at the White House. They wrote, quote, "Enough death, enough destruction. This is a moral obligation. This is our call and our prayer this Christmas," unquote. Now, adding to this sense of the United States being on the wrong side of history was a New York Times article on December 10th. Now, keep in mind, the New York Times generally has been on the side of the so-called rules-based order, the unipolar order, a defense of the Western war hawks. But we're seeing a slight shift in that. And here was a December 10th article which details the combined effects, or efforts rather, of Israel and Qatar to finance Hamas. The article says that there was at least $30 million a month delivered by a joint team of Qatar and and Israeli officials to Palestine with the simple intent to divide the Palestinians. That was what the Israelis were trying to do. The article goes through the details how the money was delivered. The intent was supposedly not to provide money to the military wing of Hamas, although the article points out that there was no way they really could prevent that, which means that, as Netanyahu himself has bragged, Israel was building up Hamas, which now it claims the moral obligation to obliterate. Now, the article has some very interesting quotes, including from the current finance minister, Smotrich, who's one of the leading proponents of ethnic cleansing of Palestine. In 2015, as a Knesset member, Smotrich said, quote, "The Palestinian Authority," referring to the government in the West Bank, "is a burden. Hamas is an asset." That's from Smotrich. Then a former head of Israel's military intelligence staff said, quote, and this is in the December 10th New York Times article, "The logic was that Hamas should be strong enough to rule Gaza, but weak enough to be deterred by Israel," unquote. There are some people who say that moral obligation and clarity requires support of Netanyahu because of the barbarity of the Hamas actions on October 7th. Most of the world has concluded that that's not the case, that as barbaric as the October 7th attack was, the reaction by Israel is worse. In fact, it's going to ensure not peace, but decades of hate and continued warfare. There's only one solution to this. You need a comprehensive settlement, one based on a political agreement which is backed by economic agreement, which will benefit both Israel and Palestine. There's no other alternative. And whether you like or dislike the United Nations or distrust the United Nations, the UN has been fairly clear from the beginning that the UN Resolution 242, which is still in existence, calls for a two-state solution, which would be one for the benefit of both the people of Israel and Palestine, one which is secure and secured by joint prosperity through mutually beneficial cooperation. That's what Lyndon LaRouche laid out in 1975. It's been on the table since Shimon Peres discussed the idea of a Marshall Plan for both countries in 1985, and it was embodied by the Oslo Accord, which had economic annexes, which called for investment in physical production of water resources, power, transportation that would unite the two countries and give them an incentive to act in the interest of the other. This is the principle of the Peace of Westphalia, which Helga Zepp-LaRouche and our organization have put forward from the beginning of this conflict, long before the beginning of this. That this, which goes back to 1648, the idea that you settle these disagreements, these wars, these confrontations, not by escalation, but by taking into your mind and heart the condition of the other. This is what Putin was calling for in Ukraine, that there should be mutual security guarantees for both sides. This is what John Kennedy talked about at the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when he proposed a wide-reaching détente policy to the Soviet Union. This is the only policy that makes sense. The United States is on the wrong side of history. And I don't mean the American people. I think the American people are beginning to realize that the Biden administration is now a participant in the genocide being carried out in Gaza. This is unacceptable to the world. It should be unacceptable to everyone watching this video. You have to join our mobilization. Join with us to get a restoration of the principles of the Peace of Westphalia as the only basis for a long-term condition of peace and prosperity for humanity. So thanks for joining me today. I'll be back again tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.